Hello, Bravs. We're back with anyone's son, Roberta Roche, with Harry De La Roche Jr., a true story of the murder of the De La Roche family on Thanksgiving 1976. Section 35. Before the defense began, Judge Madden turned down John's motion to dismiss the charges on the grounds that the prosecution had not presented enough evidence. The judge also denied a motion for a mistrial when John brought out the point that the jurors had been permitted to visit their families in Camden the previous Saturday. At the time, the defense hadn't known the sequestered jurors had been bused to Camden County to visit with their families in a special room in the Ivystone Inn in Pensauken, while four members of the sheriff's department patrolled the tables where they sat. John contended that the jurors had not been properly supervised during the 2-hour meeting and could have discussed the case, but Judge Madden denied the motion after each of the 16 jurors polled said they hadn't discussed the case among themselves or with relatives. Personally, I think common sense tells you that the 12 final jurors, at least one had to talk to his or family about it, to his or her family about it. How could four sheriff's officers effectively watch 16 jurors and their families? I think it would have been better if each juror had been polled in private rather than in a full courtroom. My defense began with three of my friends testifying for me. Vinnie Trojan came in a three-piece suit, and Jeff Fritz, by then a security guard, arrived in uniform. Both said I had indicated to them that I planned to return to the Citadel after Thanksgiving vacation. Vinny took it for granted that if I'd returned by car, I was taking my Mustang back, and Jeff recalled I told him I'd see him on Christmas vacation. Jeff the causemaker followed them on the stand, and Jeff looked pretty much the same, with his still longish hair, fine features, and bright-colored sport shirt. Jeff said he had seen both Ronnie and me using marijuana. Then he added he used to see Ronnie several times a week down at the bowling alley. He would be looking for marijuana to sell at Pascack Hills High School. Jeff testified he wanted to set up a dealing business for the money, prestige, and friends he would make from it. Jeff said that Ronnie, though interested in acquiring harder drugs to sell because he could sell them readily, always turned down anything but marijuana for his own use. Generally, the main point of Ronnie's conversation was getting some sort of drug operation going, but he was concerned about money and not having the financial means to set up the drug operation. Jeff also stated that Ronnie had expressed a fear that my father would discover the drugs and beat him. The next day, Steve Mahoney, wearing his good blue blazer and sporting a small mustache, talked about our activities during Thanksgiving vacation and answered questions about Ronnie and drugs. One of the things he talked about was Ronnie's Saturday party the night I came home from the Citadel when my parents went to Port Jervis. He told how he and I stopped at the house and how he saw Ronnie with a box on his lap that held rolling papers, rolling machine, a scale, and some other things. We smiled at each other as he left the stand and mouthed the words Nanuet Mall. I was thinking of the happy times when we acted like idiots up there. Word had gone out that I would be on the witness stand that day, so there was a line outside of the courtroom as spectators waited to get in. When one person left, another would be admitted, and that went on all day. I testified for 2.25 hours, and when I took the stand, I noticed some jurors adjust their glasses and really start to stare. I told how I had killed Ronnie, and one of the jurors started to cough and looked about ready to get sick. John asked me several questions about my relations with my father, but Mr. Sulkin objected to this questioning, and Judge Madden ruled that such testimony was not relevant. Harry W. De La Roche Sr. is not on trial, he stated. Maybe Harry De La Roche Sr. is not legally on trial, John countered, but maybe the jurors would like to know when they sit in judgment of his son what sort of person the father was. On the following morning, people woke up to what was called the blizzard of 78. It was the second worst storm in the county in the past 30 years, and driving was so treacherous, schools, plants, and businesses were closed. The storm was a motorist's nightmare, so court was canceled on Friday and also on Saturday when the jurors had asked to work, since Monday would start their fourth week in court. To me, it was a personal loss since it interrupted my testimony and delayed the trial longer. John was angered at the 2-day halt because delay in my testimony detracted from its impact and was detrimental to us. When we resumed the trial on January 23rd, I testified that my confession of the killings was only half true and admitted I had lied in several statements to police about how my family was slain. I said I could give details of the crime by using Ronnie's description, and I stated that when I told those lies, my mental state was confused. Prior to the cross-examination, which lasted for more than an hour, John patted me supportively on the shoulder. Then Mr. Selkin attacked my credibility by forcing me to continue admitting I'd lied several times. He hammered away at discrepancies and insisted, as he had the first day, that I was trying to frame my brother. It went against me, as John expected. That is usual. I showed no emotion, but how can you help what you are? During his cross-examination on how I'd been treated and how I felt November 28th, Mr. Sulkin asked the following. Question, when did you first begin to feel tired that day, Mr. de la Roche? Answer, I don't recall. It wasn't tired. It was just actually a strange feeling what had happened. Question, did you really want to go to sleep after what you had seen and what you had done? Answer, well, what I really wanted to do was to commit suicide, go to jail and commit suicide. That's why the statement was given. Quick. Question, Mr. de la Roche, I'm sorry. Were you? Answer, no. Go ahead. Question, Mr. de la Roche, when you put Ronald's body in the trunk, did you feel like committing suicide? Answer, I don't know what I felt. Question, when you took your father's body and moved it to Ronald's bed, did you feel like committing suicide? Answer, Mr. Salkin, I can't put in words how I felt, and I don't think you've ever felt that way at my guess. I don't know how you can explain how a person would feel finding his family dead, finding the person who did it living, being a brother, someone who you love, shot him and then realize what you've done. Now, how are you supposed to feel? When court recessed at 2:35, I went back to my cell. But before the night was over, I was moved to a suicide watch cell. Nobody said so in so many words, but I knew what the authorities were thinking, that things were going so badly for me, they weren't taking any chances. I didn't like the idea at all, and I was really mad. All of my things were moved in with me. So, in addition to a cot with rolled up sheets for a pillow, the cell was a hodgepodge of boxes with my books, tapes, and mail. There was a table in the center of the room for a small TV, and one wall had an ironic sign that asked, "Are you in control?" I was still mad. The next morning when I went back to court, and Aunt Arden said she knew it the minute she saw my face. The high spot of the trial that day was Dr. David Galena, the psychiatrist for the defense, who told the jury he had approximately 30 hours of direct talking with me and 25 hours of evaluating. He described me as a bright, nonviolent young man and emphasized that my personality traits included denying a problem existed and excluding from my consciousness painful or unacceptable memories, desires, and impulses. Then he added that another trait was my compliance with authority figures, all through childhood. From a psychiatric point of view, I would say Harry's personality structure was not one of a youngster who was well-adjusted, he explained. I would say that his growing up process was a very tumultuous and emotional one, and I suspect that he did better and felt better when he was younger than he did as he approached adolescence. When John asked for a fuller explanation of my personality structure, he gave the following description. Everything is very black and white to this boy. He sees his growing up in only one of two ways. Either he does what his parents want from him, or he doesn't do what his parents want from him. There is no middle ground. There's no bending. There's a rigid, fixed kind of person. An analogy would be a sapling that can bend and find the middle ground to work out problems as against a pipe or stick of metal, which doesn't bend hardly at all. And when it does, and it finally does, it doesn't bend, it just snaps. This is the rigidity of this boy's basic personality structure. He's a very distrustful and guarded type of person. No one really knows what his feelings are until the feelings just explode and come out. Then they're apparent to everyone. But to look at him, by and large, he looks pretty much okay. When Dr. Galena began to talk about the night of the murders, he said that at the time I was psychotic, emotionally trapped, and residing in a pressure cooker of fear. As he talked directly to the jury, he described the personality conflict that developed between my father and me over my education at the Citadel. He testified that during Thanksgiving vacation, I became obsessed with the thought that I could return to a school, but I was torn between my desire to leave and my desire to stay and please my father and work out what I was supposed to do. The conflict between these desires was intense, and the problem was I couldn't bring myself to confront my father because my personality structure would be devalued. My father would withdraw his love. I couldn't contend with the impulsive and violent reaction I anticipated, and I wasn't equipped to deal with this stress. I knew from all of my reading that psychotic meant Dr. Galena thought I was suffering from a mental disorder, often involving disorganization of the total personality, with or without organic disease. And from the moment he used the word, it became the basis of much argument between the defense and the state. Not really sure why they used that as their defense, since they were claiming that Ronnie had killed everybody and he had just killed Ronnie. I mean, what's the point of saying you didn't get along with your father? That only just makes you look more guilty. Honestly, it's a bad tact. I knew from all the readings that psychotic meant Dr. Galena thought I was suffering. Did I just read this? I was suffering from a mental disorder, often involving disorganization of the total personality, with or without organic disease. And from the moment he used the word, it became the basis of much argument between the defense and the state. Before the arguments began, however, John asked Dr. Galena to tell the jury what I'd told him had happened on November 28th. In answer, Dr. Galena described how he'd gone over the confession I'd given at 4 p.m. in great detail with me. Then John asked if I had also discussed my statement that Ronnie shot the family. When he answered yes, he did, you could sense confusion in the courtroom. Enough confusion, as a matter of fact, to make the prosecutor ask, "Can we have clarification, Your Honor?" The judge agreed he'd like that, too. Then John asked for a short recess since we'd been at it for an hour and a half. Following the recess, John showed Dr. Galena a copy of the confession and asked if he'd actually gone over it line by line with me. Dr. Galena answered just about, so John's next question was, assuming that Harry had done the acts set forth in the document, and at the time he performed these acts, was his ability to do these acts or the awareness of the consequences psychologically impaired? Mr. Salkin objected to the form of this question, so the jurors were excused while John and the state argued about the direction of the questioning on a psychological impairment. The judge got into the middle, and a bombshell that baffled the courtroom took place. The court, I would like to put this on the record. I would like to know what defense we are pursuing here, and as to what counts of the indictment. Are we going to a general insanity defense here, or are we going to diminish capacity just in connection with the alleged murder of Ronnie or the 4 individuals? Are you hitting me with something that might be an alternative situation? I didn't do it, but if I did, I was of a diminished capacity at the time. I would like to know what we are doing at this time because You have got me confused. Where am I and where are we going? Mr. Taylor, I had set up at the beginning of this case, Your Honor, a defense of insanity under the rules, and so I notified the prosecutor. Mr. Salkin, yes, I have a notice of insanity defense, Your Honor. At one point, Mr. Taylor indicated he was withdrawing the insanity defense. Mr. Taylor, I never indicated I was withdrawing the insanity defense. The court, I will tell you quite frankly, I didn't know everything that went on during the pretrial, but I thought that you were pursuing the defense of diminished capacity. That was my understanding. I could be wrong because I don't have the record here, but I will listen to that argument later. What are we going on? A general defense or insanity now? Is that the... Mr. Taylor, we are going on a defense, Your Honor, of general insanity to all 4 counts. This took the courtroom by surprise, and Judge Madden asked my lawyer twice if he understood him correctly. Later, people considered the abandonment of the earlier defense that I killed only Ronnie an admission that I'd killed everyone, and was insane when I did it. They called it a sudden reversal or a switch in defense. I wasn't surprised at this move, however, because on a previous evening, John and Bob Kleinberg had met with Dr. Galena and decided that the way the trial was going, it would be wise to try to get me into a mental hospital rather than a state prison. Inasmuch as the confession had been admitted and because the judge wouldn't allow testimony on my childhood and family life, they felt the jury would believe the confession. With this in mind, they thought it would be better to ask the jury to find me not guilty because I was insane and unable to appreciate the quality of the act. If acquitted because of legal insanity, I'd face commitment to a mental hospital until I was judged sane. If found guilty of first-degree murder, I'd face a mandatory life sentence. On the morning that Dr. Galena was to testify, John explained where we stood on this and asked if I wanted to go along with it or whether I'd rather take a chance on going down and doing time. I'll go along on the insanity plea, I told him immediately. Maybe it won't be the right decision, but it's what I want to do. I'd rather go to a funny farm than be killed in a state prison. After a short discussion about going to this defense, the judge and prosecutor mentioned on an August 1977 report in which Dr. Galena had said I was mentally competent to stand trial and appeared to be legally sane by the common standards of Mr. McNaughton. Now tell me, how are you going to overcome that statement on cross-examination, demanded Judge Madden. John argued that the statement referred to my ability to cooperate in my defense, but before anything was really resolved, the judge recessed the court for lunch. After lunch, he ruled John could change his defense because he had found John had notified the prosecutor's office that the defense would be insanity. The document never specified how many murders the insanity defense would apply to. When the jury returned to the courtroom, Dr. Galena continued to testify that at the moment of the deaths, I was no longer in control and unable to make judgments. He said that emotions were running my life and that my mind was not registering such external facts as what's right, what's wrong, what the law is, what might happen to me, or even what the consequences were of what I was doing to the people involved. I don't think Harry would have available to him at that time of the killings the intellectual process to know what he was doing or even to realize the concept of death, he pointed out. Before his emotions exploded, he was hopelessly trapped between two hopeless situations. Then he went on to explain to the jury that the acts after the murders, let me scratch my eye here, might be the result of a person coming out of psychosis, a person who is frightened because of what had happened. John asked again if Dr. Galena had discussed the statement in which I'd related that Ronnie had shot the family and that I, in turn, shot Ronnie. When Dr. Galena said, yes, I did, for a second time, we had the following testimony. In your opinion as a psychiatrist, does Harry believe this statement? Answer, yes. I think that at this point he truly believes that this is the occurrence that happened on the evening in question, to the point that the story almost verbatim now covers the same ground, uses the same words. He is totally undeviating in any suggestion that it may have happened in any other way. He out and out refuses at this point to even discuss that first statement which he went through this morning. He demonstrates the same flatness of emotion in his discussions now, and states, and that has, he demonstrates the same flatness of emotion in his discussions now, and that has become more pronounced, although he never discussed the incident or the acts involved with much emotion. He is completely fixed in his story. I believe it is totally unyielding. I don't believe anyone will ever get him to change it or to say anything else to the contrary. And I believe he firmly is convinced and believes himself that that is what happened, and this is true. Mr. Salkin opened his cross-examination by referring again to the August report in which Dr. Galena had said I was capable of standing trial and legally staying. He asked many questions about the report and stressed that Dr. Galena had indicated there were no psychosis responses. Question: will you indicate to me, looking through this report, where you used the language that Mr. de la Roche had a psychotic episode on this night, the night of the slayings? Will you show me where that is, Doctor? Answer: the report does not direct itself directly. Let me put this a little differently. The report was written in an attempt to give a fair and complete appraisal of Harry de la Roche's character, structure, and personality exactly along the lines I went through at some length this morning. The actual application of what happened on that evening, or on what his mental state was at the time that he committed these acts, is not specifically referred to in this report. Dr. Galena went on to reemphasize that the report only dealt with my state of mind during the psychiatric examination, and that at that time I did not suffer from a psychosis. He said the psychotic behavior was presently in remission, but held it could be triggered by any stressful situation at any time. His pre-psychotic personality has been with him for many years, and it could not be ruled out that he could be suicidal, he declared. This is a person who, under pressure such as prison, is capable of doing harm to himself. He could reach such heights that he could again become psychotic as he did on that night. He needs long-term hospitalization, drugs, and psychotherapy. After Mr. Salkin's cross-examination, the defense rested our case. Next, we waited for 45 minutes while Dr. Joseph Zigarelli, the psychiatrist for the state, was called. I thought he was patronizing on the stand, and sometimes it seemed he talked as much about being a major in the Second World War as he did about my case. He said he'd examined me on 3 occasions about my case. He said he'd examined me on 3 occasions and testified I was not psychotic when my family was slain. As he discussed my mental state or mental malady, the prosecutor asked, Doctor, do you have an opinion with respect to Mr. de la Roche's ability to understand and be aware of the nature of his acts during the early morning hours of November 28th, 1976? Answer: he was capable. Question: and Doctor, with respect to his acts in the early morning hours of November 28th, 1976, could he appreciate the nature and quality of those acts? Answer: in my opinion, he could. Question: with respect to those acts of the early morning hours of November 28th, 1976, Doctor, was he able to? Did he have the ability to distinguish right from wrong? Answer: in my opinion, he could. When John cross-examined the state psychiatrist and seemed to be probing for answers, Dr. Zigarelli lost his cool and stated directly to the judge that he didn't like that type of probing. But the judge said John was within his bounds of cross-examination, So after that little interlude, the cross-examinating went on. As soon as John completed it, the state rested in rebuttal, and I was returned to the suicide watch cell till court resumed the next morning for the lawyer's summations and the judge's charge. All right, we're getting there. Almost done. With Eddie One's son. Goodbye, bruv. That's all.